Welcome to this Wisel Excel VBA tutorial. In this video we're going to look at how to use filters to find items in Outlook folders. We'll start by looking at how to get a list of inbox items so that we have something to search for, and then look at the basics of filtering the items collection starting by using the sender name. We'll explain how you can check if something was found, and then how you can expand your filters by testing multiple criteria using the AND operator. We'll move on and look at how you can filter an items list by using the subject, including how you can deal with replies and forwarded items for email items. Finally, we'll look at how we can return some details from the item that we found, including copying and pasting the embedded Word document for the body text of the email. So let's get started. The aim of this video is to show you how to create a simple system which can retrieve a list of all of the emails from your Outlook inbox, and then subsequently allows you to select a single one of those emails and click a button to retrieve the details of that email into an embedded Word document in the worksheet. To make this system work, we'll need to learn about how the find method works in Outlook. To get started, we'll write the code that retrieves the list of emails from your inbox. Let's create a brand new blank Excel workbook, and then we can type in some column headings, sender and subject in the first row of the new sheet. If you want to apply any basic formatting, please feel free to do that, just to make the column headings stand out a little bit. And I can also close down the previous example I was just showing you, so I can close down the sample code. Then we'll head into the Visual Basic Editor, so I can head to the Developer tab, open the Visual Basic Editor, insert a new module in the standard way, and then create a new subroutine called Get Inbox Items. We'll use references to two different object libraries to write our code. So let's head to the Tools menu and choose References, and then from the list that appears we can find Microsoft Outlook, and whichever version you happen to have on your machine is the one to go for. Mine's Outlook 16.0, I'm using Outlook 2016. We'll have another library reference to Microsoft Word as well, so while we're here we can scroll further through the list, find Microsoft Word, and again just go with whichever version number you have access to in your list. When you've checked the box you can click OK, and then we can start writing the actual code. We've looked at how to loop over the items in a folder in several previous videos in this series, so let's skip over the basics quite quickly. We'll declare a variable called OL as an Outlook.application. Then a variable called ns as an Outlook.namespace, and finally a variable called fol as Outlook.folder. We can set OL to be equal to a new instance of the Outlook application, so we can say set OL equals new Outlook.application. Then we can set the namespace variable setNS equals ol.getNamespace, and as you'll remember from previous videos, the only one available to Outlook is called Mappy. Finally, I want to get a reference to the built-in inbox folder, so I can do that by saying setFOL equals ns.getDefaultFolder, and then simply choose OL folder inbox from the list. Next, we can loop over the items collection of the folder object. Let's create a couple of extra variables. I'll create a variable called I as object, and that's going to represent any item in the inbox folder. And we'll also have one called mi as Outlook.mailItem. So that will give us access to the specific list of methods and properties of a mail item class. We can then create a for each loop by saying for each I in fol.items. I want to test if the class of item is an OL mail object, so I'm going to say if I.class equals OL mail, then I'm going to set mi to be equal to I, end if, and then close my loop by saying next I. Now I'd like to write out the sender name and subject of each email into the worksheet. To help with that, let's create a variable which helps keep track of the number of items we've looked at so far. So I'm going to declare a variable called n as long. Before I start looping through this list, I'm going to initialize n to be equal to 1. And then for each email item I encounter, I'm going to increment the value of n. I'm going to say n equals n plus 1. What I can then do is use that value to reference the relevant cell. So I'm going to use the cells property. I'll use n to represent the row number, and then the number 1 for column number 1, and I'm going to set its value to be equal to mi.senderName. Similarly, I can say cells n,2 dot value equals mi.subject. The final thing I'm going to do in this procedure is add a bit of code that clears out the contents of the current list before we write in the new details. So let's add an extra line of code just before we start looping. I'm going to say range a2, range a2 dot end xl down dot end xl to right, close two sets of parentheses, and then say clear. So that will clear out the entire list starting at cell A2 regardless of how many items belong to it. Now we can return to the Excel worksheet and perhaps create a simple button. From the Developer tab, we can use the Insert tool to draw a simple Form Controls button somewhere over towards the right-hand side. And then when we've done that, we can choose to assign the Get Inbox Items macro to it. While we're here, we could edit the text on the button, so we can say Get Email List or something along those lines. And then we can click away from the button to activate it, click back on the button to trigger the code, and we should end up with a list of all of the emails belonging to the current inbox. Now I'd like to write the code that will allow us to select a sender in the list in column A and then retrieve the details for the email corresponding to that sender and subject. Let's start by heading back to the Visual Basic Editor, and then we can create a new subroutine somewhere down towards the bottom called Get Email Details. Now, a large part of this procedure will be similar to what we've done already at the start of the previous procedure. So let's just do a bit of copy paste to save a bit of time. I'm going to copy all of my variables and then the 3 lines which set references to the Outlook application, namespace and inbox folder. So let's simply copy those and paste them straight into the Get Email Details procedure. I'll just throw a few blank lines in there to bring this one to the top so we can see a little more clearly what we're going to do next. This system is going to rely on using the find method of the items collection of the folder object. Just to show the basic syntax of that, fol.items.find. We then need to pass in a string of text representing a filter. And just to help us with that, what we'll do is declare a variable to help us build up the filter. So actually we won't need the long variable, the counter variable this time, so let's replace that with a variable called filter text as string. The first filter that we'll construct will ask if the sender name is equal to the value of the cell we've selected. So this system assumes we've selected the name of a sender that we want to retrieve an email from. So for example, I might want to ask if the sender name equals Andy, if that's what I've got selected. If you're interested in how filters work in general, there's quite a long description of how filters work on the items.find method page in the Microsoft documentation. So you'll find lots and lots of examples of how you can build up filters. It gives you some ideas of how to reference various column names, various field names in Outlook. So I'm just going to take you through a few basic examples of this, but there's lots more documentation available for you to read at your leisure. So let's just have a quick look. If I try to construct a filter text equals, and then if I knew that I was going to look for the sender name of Andy, what I would do is write in the name of the field I'm searching in a set of square brackets, so that's sender name, equals, and then the text that I'm looking for gets wrapped up in some single quotes. So for example, Andy, like so. Now, of course, that's no good to us because we want to make this work based on the value of the cell we've selected. So what we need to do is remove the word Andy and break this string into 2 separate parts. So we'll have the beginning part sender name equals and the opening single quote, and then the final part will just be the closing single quote. What we can then do is concatenate the value of the cell that we have selected. So we can say active cell.value, and then concatenate that to the closing single quote. Now we can pass the filter text into the find method and ask it to return a reference to the first item that it finds matching that criterion. So we want to return the reference to an item into our I variable, so we can say set I equals fol.items.find, open some parentheses, and then pass in the filter text variable. It is possible that the find method won't return a reference to any item. So what we could do is check to see if I is nothing after we've performed the find method. We can say if I is nothing, then. I think it makes sense to present a simple message to the user using a message box to say something like nothing was found. We could perhaps show a VB exclamation symbol on the message as well. At that point, we'd simply want to exit from the subroutine. It's pointless continuing if we haven't found anything yet. So let's have an exit substatement and then end if. We'd also like to test that the item we found is a mail item. So let's have another if statement that checks if I.class is not equal to OLMail, then. We can display another message box saying something like item is not an email. And then perhaps also have a VB exclamation symbol on that message. And again, if we haven't found an email object, we might as well exit the sub because it's pointless continuing from that stage. Assuming that we've passed these bits of validation, we can finally set mi to be equal to I, and then just to check that the code is working, we can say something like debug.print mi dot, and let's attempt to print out the subject for the email that we've found. Then to test the system, we can just make sure that we have at least one sender name selected. I'll go with this one here, Microsoft Visual Studio. I can then return to the Visual Basic Editor, run the subroutine, view the immediate window, and just check that we have indeed printed out the subject of the email corresponding to the sender whose name we've selected. As this system is dependent on the user having selected a sender name first, we should make sure that they have indeed selected a cell in the correct range. So before we do anything up at the top of this procedure, let me just close the immediate window to give us some more space. What we should do is check that the cell that the user has selected falls within the range starting at cell A2 and ending at whichever cell happens to be at the end of that list. We can do this using the application.intersect method. So let's write an if statement, if application.intersect. And then we can pass in two ranges of cells, or well, multiple ranges of cells, but we're going to pass in two. The first range is the active cell, and then I want to check the range that begins in range A2 and ends at range A2.end XL down. What I can then do is check if the result of that intersect method is nothing, then I know that the user hasn't selected a cell in the correct range. So I'll say message box, please select a sender name first. And then we could perhaps have a VB critical symbol on that just for a bit of variety, and then exit sub. We can say end if to wrap up that if statement. And just another quick simple test, if I go back to Excel and I click on a cell which isn't in the correct range, if I go back and run the subroutine again, I'll now find that I'm told to select a sender name first. A fairly major limitation of our system as it stands is that if we have multiple emails from the same sender, we only return details for the first one that the find method encounters. Let's make our search a little more specific by incorporating the subject within our filter text. If we return to the Visual Basic Editor, we'll have another line below the filter text line which sets filter text to be equal to itself plus some more text. So filter text equals filter text and or ampersand. The first bit of literal text I'm going to incorporate within the filter is the logical operator and. So you can use both and or operators in a fairly standard way, and again the documentation for items.find contains help on how that works. So I'd like to check that both the sender name is equal to the value of the cell I've selected and the subject field, so I can write the word subject in square brackets, is equal to, and then open a set of single quotes, close a set of double quotes, another ampersand, to concatenate the value of the cell that is offset one column to the right, I'll try that again, offset one column to the right from the active cell. Finally, I just need to close the single quote to complete the string, and that will generate a filter text that incorporates two logical tests joined with an AND operator. if we can quickly test this by switching back into Excel and then selecting a sender name for which we have at least 2 items. So I've got SQL Server Central here with 2 items. I'll select the one that has using backup encryption as its subject. If I return to the Visual Basic Editor, view the immediate window, and then run the subroutine, beg your pardon, I'll click into the subroutine I want to run first and then run it using backup encryption. If I switch back to Excel and then select the other SQL Server Central with hidden formatting troubles, sounds ominous, let's run that subroutine again, I'll get a different subject, hidden formatting troubles. So we're clearly distinguishing between different emails from the same sender. One slightly curious feature of filtering by subject is that if the subject includes a forward or reply indicator, such as 2 of the emails I have in this list, look, I've got re-test reply and FW test forward. If I selected either of those 2 emails and run the subroutine, it tells me nothing was found. I mean, I must have found something because clearly those emails are in the list and I've retrieved the subject field, but when you're testing the subject in a filter, it ignores the RE colon space and the FW colon space. So what we need to do is write some more code to strip off those characters if they're found in the subject. There are several ways we could solve this problem. I'm going to start by closing the immediate window and then declare a new variable called subject text, which allows me to first of all capture the subject from the appropriate cell. So let's do that before we begin building our filter text. I'm going to say subject text equals, and then simply copy and paste ActiveCell.offset 0,1.value. What I can then do is test for the characters that I might encounter in there, so RE colon space or FW colon space. One way I can do that is using a select case statement. So I'm going to say select case, and then I want to check if the first 4 characters of the subject text are equal to either FW colon space or RE colon space. So I want to look for the 4 leftmost characters in subject text. One way to do that is by using a left function. So I can say left subject text, comma 4. Now when I'm comparing strings in VBA, by default the comparisons are case sensitive. So what I'm also going to do is use an lcase function so that it doesn't matter what case the subject line has been written in. I can then write a case within the select case statement which says if the case is either RE colon space or, I beg your pardon, I don't need to write the word or, I need to write a comma and then FW colon space. If that condition or either of those 2 conditions are met, I can then say that subject text equals everything beginning from the 5th character of the subject text. So I'm going to use another string function, one called mid this time. The mid function allows me to set a string that I'm getting my characters from, so that's going to be subject text, and then a starting position within that string. So I'd like to start at the 5th character. I can then optionally set a length, but I don't need to. If I omit the length, the mid function will return everything to the end of the string. So only if the subject text contains these 4 characters, it will strip off the first 4 characters and reset what's contained in subject text. So I can then simply say nselect and finally replace the part in the filter text that refers to the value of the cell with the words subject text. I can now give this system a quick test by making sure that I've got one of my 2 replies or forwards selected. I'll select the forward and then head back to the Visual Basic Editor, view the immediate window, select the subroutine I want to run and then run it, and there we go, I've got my test forward. And if I just make sure it works for the reply as well, so see the reply isn't written in caps, it's written as a combination of capital and lowercase letters. If I run this subroutine again, I should return a reference to the test reply. So that all seems to be working quite nicely. The final bit of code that we need to write involves copying the contents of the email and pasting it as an embedded Word document. And despite how complex that sounds, it's perhaps the simplest part of this entire procedure, certainly compared to some of the other things we've done. Let's start by declaring a variable called doc as a Word document. You may remember from ages ago we declared or set a reference to the Word object library, and this is exactly why. Once we've declared that variable, let's head down to after we've captured a reference to the mail item object. We can then remove our debug.print statement and say setDoc equals mi.getInspector.wordEditor, and that returns a reference to a Word document. What I can then do is copy the entire range of that document, so I can say doc.range.copy. Finally, I can reference a cell in the Excel worksheet into which I'd like to paste all of that, and I'd like to paste it in the cell or starting at the cell that contains the subject for the sender that I've just selected. So I'm going to say active cell dot offset 0,1 dot paste special. Okay, so just to give that one a quick test, if I go back to the Excel workbook and if I select one of my email senders, let's create a simple button on the worksheet using insert form controls. We can then attach our get email details subroutine to that, and then perhaps just edit the text on the button while we're here, get email details. And then we can again make sure we have a cell with a sender name selected, click get email details, and we should find that we get the entire contents of the email pasted in as an embedded Word document. Okay, so there we go. Hopefully you've learned a few basic things about how filters work and how you can use those to get different emails from your Outlook account. Don't forget you've got plenty of other information you could access from the documentation that Microsoft provides. There's lots of extra help about how filters work. So for example, if you wanted to expand your filters to make it more specific, there are many other fields you could test for, including date and time fields, for example. Whatever it is you want to do, you've got the basic code now required to filter your Outlook email lists. Hopefully you found some of the ideas there useful. Thanks for watching. See you next time.